We're so excited to have Brenda Harms on today. Just so you know, we're recording the webinar and we'll send out an email in the next several days when it's available. Without further ado, I'll let Brenda go ahead and take it from here.
Thank you, Megan. Welcome everyone to our webinar today on retention and communication to increase retention. First off, thank you for taking time from your busy schedule today to join us. We have, this is a bit of a part two, if you will, building off of the webinar we did 2 weeks ago on communication designed towards recruitment. And this is the second part of that particular series with communication with an eye towards communication for retention. We're delighted that you've joined us for this webinar and are anxious to get started. So let me go ahead. Before we dive in too far, I have committed and actually narrowed down my slides so that we will absolutely have time for questions at the end. I didn't do such a great job on that at the last webinar, so I just wanted to let you know that we will definitely have time for questions at the end, and we'll plan to move through this in a fairly reasonable clip here so that we have that opportunity to have some discussion towards the end. So just as a reminder, if you think back to that webinar from 2 weeks ago, if you happen to be on, that webinar talked a lot about with a prospective student, how do you get them to that point of, or how do you stay connected to them until they are really ready to engage with you and hopefully say yes to your academic program. Our focus today is really going to be around from that point that a student says yes. One of the things that we know around student retention is that while it's often thought about from a point where a student sits in the classroom, for those of us who live in the recruitment and marketing world, we recognize that there's actually students that decide they're coming and then never even get started. So this will touch on both of those pieces, that from the point of yes forward and then from the point of enrollment forward. So let's dive in here. Let's keep in mind that as we are part of the reason for the design around this particular webinar was that idea that as we are recruiting a student, we often are extraordinarily engaged with them. We are communicating with them very regularly. We have emails that go out regularly. Our comm flow is all in place. Everything is terrific. And then what unfortunately happens at many institutions is the minute a student starts classes, or sometimes the minute a student says, yes, go ahead, here's my application, I'm putting down my deposit, I'm enrolling in your classes, some of that engagement seems to kind of fall off the radar. So one of the pieces that we know is in place that helps to build on retention is that idea of continuous communication. Unfortunately, a lot of schools believe that they have a retention strategy, but it's really messaging that's focused on process. It's messaging that it's time to register for classes, or don't forget book buyback. And those communications are very process-driven, and while important, don't really do much to support the student's decision to attend school or to continue to attend school. So retention-focused communication really looks at that ongoing reinforcement of the decision the student has made to come to your institution and to stay with your institution. Part of why this webinar is so timely is that retention is perhaps becoming one of the most important areas within higher education. I'm not sure why it's taken quite as long as it has, but we've finally figured out that enrollment is actually not just driven by new students, but also by retaining students. And so it's become more of a front and center topic in this last year to 2 years. The other thing that we have to be cognizant of is that simply starting students back to school is really not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is helping them to finish their degree, and so really staying focused on that throughout. Our ability to keep connected with those prospects as they move toward an enrolled student and then eventually graduate is really a crucial part of enrollment success. I will also tell you it's a crucial part of alumni success if you want to turn your graduates into donors down the road. When we typically think of retention, as I said before, we think of students who are quote-unquote sitting in class, and I understand for many of you that might be virtually, and whether this is a graduate student, an adult degree completer, or an traditional undergraduate student, we think of retention about taking place or jumping into action, if you will, from that point of, okay, you started and now we want to keep you with us. What I'm going to suggest to you is that retention actually needs to start back further than that. It needs to start from that point where the student commits to you, whether verbally or through an action, and then getting them first goal of retention is to get them to actually start in class and then beyond. As I love to say, first and foremost, working so hard on the front end from an enrollment perspective is only helpful if they actually persist through to graduation. The other piece to keep in mind is we are starting to see in some states, not many, but it seems to be a direction we might be moving in higher ed, is that funding from the state for public institutions is going to be more tied to retention than it is front-end enrollment in the future. So this is really a critical issue from that perspective as well. For schools who only have the option to get a full funding for a single student if that student graduates, this idea of ongoing communication and keeping students connected to us will become more and more important. One of the things that I worry about is that we often believe that retention is actually a product of classroom environment, that students don't stay because students are unhappy with their academic experience. And while I'm certainly not suggesting that some students aren't in that particular position, I will also suggest to you that not all students are in that particular position, particularly if actually at any age, life happens, other things happen for that student, and school seems to be the thing that they're willing to and able to let go of, rather than making other sorts of choices. And sometimes they're absolutely right. That is the best decision for them to stop out of school. But many times they're not as familiar with what all their options might be to stay connected with the school. So I think part of that retention effort is having that person for individual students to go to when they are running into a little bit of a rough patch, to go to and talk with and talk through the idea of what are their possible options. Probably the fourth piece of this for me is that I really do believe that most of the strongest relationships that students have on campus, absolutely with their faculty, but really with the person who brought them to school, so their recruiter, and then their academic advisor, if academic advising is being done well on your college campus. So those two relationships are really foundational to most students, and I think building on those through purposeful communication being sent out by either a recruiter or an academic advisor is a real critical element here. So when I think about a student who decides to return to school, remember the decision isn't made when they come and sit down in your office and have a first early discussion with a recruiter. There is literally a point in time during that process when a student says, yes, not only am I coming back to school, but I'm coming back to school with you. And that moment looks different campus to campus. So I'm going to need to ask you to pull that information through your own lens at your school. For some students, it's once they've deposited. For other students, it's once they've formally filled out the application. Very high conversion rates on that number. For other students, it literally can be last minute when a student shows up in class. So you'll need to kind of evaluate what that experience is like for you. Once a student has gotten to yes and said, yes, I'm going, and yes, I'm choosing you, one of the things that we have to do better as institutions is continue to sell that they've made a good choice. Continue to promote in them their decision, because candidly, the moment a student says yes is the moment a student starts to doubt their decision. And we have all done this. It's the infamous buyer's remorse. We think about something, we plan for something. How many homeowners haven't done this, where they plan, they are purposeful, they search for months and months and months, they buy a house, and the day they sign on the bottom line is the day they begin to panic that they've made a bad decision. It's a similar thing if you think about it in higher education. Students get all excited, they're searching, they're looking, they're shopping, they make their choice, and then they start to what if, or maybe there was another option, or maybe I should wait. And so really being sensitive to that idea of buyer's remorse, I think, is really important. We also have to be prepared to help them to overcome the resistance that they're going to face with others. And in a future slide, I talk about support systems. It's amazing to me, and perhaps it's just a little bit human nature, but it's amazing to me how often students who have full support of family and friends and employers while they are shopping for school, literally once they decide they're going, all of a sudden someone in their support system becomes a detractor and starts to kind of second guess them. One of the ways that I think is really critical for us to connect and stay connected with our students longer term is by literally asking permission. encourage them that you want to continue to walk down the road with them towards getting them enrolled and into classes and through to graduation. So ask permission to stay with them. It also, I think, really does a nice job of demonstrating that we are far more interested in them finishing than we are in them simply starting. So with that in mind, from the moment a student says yes, for whatever that means at your institution, and some of my examples here I've put in, whether it's a graduate program or a degree completion program for adults, as I know that's a lot of the audience that's tuned into this webinar. I also know that there are some folks tuned into this webinar who are also looking at traditional undergrad. So again, I'm going to have to ask you to kind of customize this or tailor this to your individual circumstance. But overall, from that point in time when a student says yes to that idea of returning to school, First and foremost, I think that there are real opportunities for most of us to continue to reinforce the fact that they have professionally and financially made a great decision. That completing a degree, whether you are 18 years old, 25 years old, 47 years old, doing a master's, a bachelor's, really does position you well for further opportunities, both professionally and financially. I also think we have to acknowledge very early on that they've really made a brave choice. The easier thing to do, I was just with a school earlier this week, and one of the comments that I heard was that it's always a hard choice for our students to come back to school. It is far easier to just continue on with life as status quo, and that's really true for all of us. Making that decision to return to college is literally adding one more thing to our plate that's going to be very time-consuming and also very financially consuming. I think it's important to reinforce for students they've made a brave choice and they've really made a good investment in themselves. I think it's also really critical for us as recruiters and on the very front end of this process, academic advisors, if any of you are academic advisors, that we have to be honest about the fact that it's pretty normal to feel completely overwhelmed as you are getting started. Normalizing that feeling of, oh my gosh, this is too much and I can't handle it, I think helps a student to work through it. One way that we might be able to do this is by connecting our students to other students, whether those are current students or you might have a peer mentors program on your campus, getting them connected early, even before they actually sit in class, virtually or face-to-face. I think can often help them to be better prepared for what the start is going to be like. It's also, I think, a real responsibility of ours to continue to help them to navigate. Honestly, sometimes at some schools, I feel like saying, yes, I want to enroll is the easy part. Navigating the process and the paperwork once they say yes can also sometimes be the bigger headache. So helping them throughout that process, I think, is really critical. Checking in on their own support system and helping them to understand, and some of this can even take place, it should even take place prior maybe to them getting to yes or just as they're arriving at yes. Identifying who is going to support them, who is going to help them with this process, who is going to be their cheerleader and be in their corner. And areas that seem to be snags, especially for the adult and graduate population market, are things like work, children, financial, transportation. But we also know with traditional undergraduate students, those pieces are actually becoming more and more relevant at that age group as well. I also think it's really critical for us to start taking a look at us as institutions of higher ed, the disconnect that might be taking place between the recruitment process and the, okay, now you're in school with us process. We have a tendency, I have a dear friend who says all the time, we love students to death until they start taking classes, then we kind of send them off on their own. And that is a disconnect that higher education has created, and we really have to be purposeful, I believe, about bridging that gap. One of the things that we all saw, and this is not a new idea by any stretch, but we all saw it becoming very popular when Facebook kind of started taking over the world, was that notion of class of. So class of 2020 Facebook groups. And we saw that very popular and very prevalent in traditional undergraduate markets. But I also know, I'm also familiar with a number of schools who are doing that for graduate programs, whether it's a cohort program or not, just kind of that whole notion of if you kind of march through the program in the prescribed or at least the suggested manner, this is roughly going to be when you're graduating. What that really does is it allows students to connect with other students who are at the front end at the same time and can really begin to move the needle forward that direction. As you sit with if your role is as a recruiter or if your job is helping students to walk through that early path, from that point in time when a student really does commit and really does say yes, a huge part of the retention effort actually begins at that moment. We have I think, tendency in higher ed to help students get through the process quickly and smoothly and easily. And that's terrific. It's one of the things you get complimented on frequently. But I think sometimes in our efforts to do that, we miss the opportunity for celebration, or having a party, if you will, when a student literally says, you know what, yes, I'm gonna jump off the deep end. I'm going to commit to giving up a ton of my time and giving up a ton of my money to come to school with you. I think it's really critical for us, particularly with our recruitment staff, to be purposeful about stopping in that moment and celebrating that moment. I put on the slide, have a party. Do whatever it is within that moment, but help your recruitment staff to understand that once a student looks them in the eye or calls them on the phone or sends them the email that says, I've decided to enroll, that the first response should not be, great, then what we're going to need is your official transcript, but rather, oh my gosh, wow, this is a huge moment. You have made a really important decision right now, and I just want to acknowledge that that's brave, that it is exciting, and that to some degree it might also be overwhelming. I personally like the idea of acknowledging that not just in the verbal conversation, but also in something slightly more formal. And by more formal, I do not mean the official acceptance letter that goes out that candidly is dry and usually has far too much information in it, and it isn't particularly party-worthy. I'm saying as a recruiter or as a dean of a program, it might be of tremendous value to somebody to get a personal handwritten note, a special card that's welcome to, something of that nature. It can also be something as quick as a phone call, but I think just really that acknowledgement that you've made a big decision. Never underestimate what touch point in a student's life cycle with you, from initial point of contact through being an alum, is going to matter the most to them. There are many opportunities to wow a student, and you never know when your timing is going to be just perfect. And what might seem like a bit of a small touch point to you, a card that just gets sent out to everybody who commits saying, welcome to our university, might not feel big to you, but with a handwritten, so glad you've joined us sort of note on the bottom might really mean a lot to that particular student. So I wanted to give you just a quick sample here. It's not anything elaborate, but just something really tight and concise. I know we celebrated when you were in my office, but I was thinking more about your decision to return to school while I was driving home last night, and I just wanted to send you a quick note. Please know that I am so happy for you that you have made this commitment to yourself. I can't wait to hear about how the journey, I can't wait to hear about the journey along the way. Something simple, something tight, something brief, but that really acknowledges, hey, you've done this, you've taken this step, and this is a big deal. In trying to put together this webinar, one of the stumbling blocks is that people's decision-making time frame and institutions' start times of class can be very, very different. So I went with an 8-week for a student who makes a decision 8 weeks before the official start of class. I know for some of you, those students might make a decision 6 months before, and maybe you only have a once-a-year start time. You're going to have to elongate this or make this tighter, depending upon your own personal circumstances, but I wanted to give you at least something to start with and something to go off of. So let's assume that 8 weeks before, 2 months before, I sit in your office and I decide, I'm going to do this. I'm going to start this graduate program, or I'm going to start this degree. After you've stopped everything and really had the party and celebrated that idea, one of the next pieces obviously does have to be that idea of process and paperwork. And I think within that process and paperwork, I think that we have opportunities to continue to reinforce that you've made a good decision. So yes, applications have to be completed, or official transcripts have to be put on file, financial aid application has to be in place, all of those things, absolutely. I know a lot of institutions provide a checklist, kind of a getting started. What I might suggest is that within that getting started checklist, you might also want to include some things that are celebratory and fun. I personally like the idea of 2 or 3 things down the checklist, including celebrating your decision. Take yourself out for lunch, or call your friends and family and tell them the great news. Take yourself back to school shopping. These are just some ideas, but to really continue to make a big deal out of, you've committed to doing this, and this is going to be exciting. Another point in time, and hopefully it's a couple of months out, but sometimes I know for some of you it's just a week out, sometimes from the start of class, but wherever this falls in your decision-making cycle and your retention cycle, know that financial aid can sometimes be the thing that once a student says yes, also causes them to step back out and say no. And sorry if you're in the financial aid world, I'm certainly not picking on you. This actually speaks to how important money and resources are to our students. A lot of students decide they're coming back to school and then have to decide they can't come to school because of the financial aid piece. So one of the things that I really encourage, whether it's, and I don't know at what point at your institution there is a handoff between between recruitment and perhaps onto academic advising, or maybe there isn't a handoff, but whoever is with and connected to that student at that point in time, I might suggest, I know somebody's going to type in the question, I might suggest at this point it's still the recruiter, simply because I think they're perhaps more diligent about continuing to sell the program. I don't know that for a fact. You might have to consider your own individual circumstances, but a lot of times the recruiter will just kind of be a little bit more on top of students throughout and being able to continue to sell the program. Whoever is responsible for the student at that time needs to be very sensitive to what's going on with that financial aid award. Number one, building a close relationship with the financial aid folks, I think, is critical to making this happen. It is fabulous if your institution allows for some sort of a notification system to take place for the recruitment staff, not of what the financial aid award was, but just that it has happened. Because that is often literally a point in time or a moment in time where everything can either be great or everything can fall apart in what can almost be a matter of minutes. So working closely with financial aid to know when that is happening is really critical. In the event you don't have some sort of an automatic alert system or can't get that set up, one of the things that I would encourage you, and this again gets back to that notion of retention being everyone's responsibility. Financial aid plays a big role in the retention game. If financial aid knows that they have a prospective student coming in the door, and again, this is easier, I know it's smaller institutions, but I think it's important enough that even at larger institutions for financial aid, knowing that they have just put together a package that doesn't provide a lot of additional support to students, and being willing to shoot off an email, being willing to send a note out to whoever is connected on the recruitment side or advising side to say, just got Brenda Harms' financial aid, it's going to be tight, or something like that, doesn't reveal too much information about the student's personal business, but does kind of flag that person to know that maybe they should reach out to Brenda Harms. Not to solve the problem, not to have the financial aid discussion, but to just simply be present at that moment to help them process through that information. Once a student has received financial aid information that might not be what they were expecting or might be a little disappointing, I think it is critical that someone reaches out to them immediately, and someone who already has the relationship. Again, financial aid is certainly going to be the person to ask the financial aid questions, but who's going to be the person who can reach out to that individual and say, Brenda, heard from financial aid that there might be a little hiccup right now. How can I help you to work through this? And that student will then want to share with you. I really do think it's important. Remember, a couple of slides ago, I talked about touching base with them on what their support system is. A piece of that support system is what's their financial backup plan. These are hard for a lot of our students. They don't have one. And so we might have to discuss a lot of ideas with them early on about what are the plan Bs for paying for school. If you've done some of that brainstorming ahead, when that information comes through financial aid that's perhaps not quite what they had hoped for, you can reach out to them and say, when we talked about your parents might be interested or willing to borrow you a few $1,000s, I'm wondering if this isn't the point in time when we need to go back and revisit that, or you might not need to reconsider that. So figuring out what the financial aid time, I don't know how far in advance that fits into your individual circumstances, but it's a critical time, and I would certainly build a retention communication or piece at that time. Okay, then moving forward, 6 weeks before the start of class. So you're narrowing in on that time when you're actually going to get started. I think an important communication is some sort of electronic communication with a real clear message that says, don't forget to get prepared beyond just school. It's a good time to remind, especially if they're an adult or a traditional age student who has a job, double checking on work schedules to make sure the bugs are out, double checking a child care situation and having a backup plan for child care. Perfect time to do that. Review the term or the semester. Are there conflicts that you know are going to come up? Again, it's fascinating to me the things that can sometimes derail our students. A student can start in September or in August and not even realize that in November they're going to have a major conflict that takes them out of town for 2 weeks or something like that. So just getting in front of that at the front end, I think, is really important, and that can be done through quick electronic communication. Again, just a sample here. I was thinking about some of the things that concerned you when you were considering returning to college. I wanted to check in with you that you had had a chance to talk with your supervisor and were comfortable that your employer would work with you on your schedule. Please let me know if you were able to get that worked out or if we need to take a second look at your schedule. So again, just trying to encourage students that simply because they have an employer that's maybe not willing to be flexible doesn't mean they need to hit the eject button. There might be other things that we can do or put in place there. A second sample here, again, just the daycare seems to be a common one for adults and graduate students, and seeing it a bit on the traditional undergrad side as well. I know you were thinking about backup plans for your daughter for while you were at school a few weeks ago when we last spoke. I'm just checking in to make sure that you had found a plan B in the event that your sister was not able to watch her while you're in class. I'm not sure if I recommended it or not, but I know the YMCA has drop-off daycare until 9 p.m. on the evenings we have classes. Please let me know if this is something you were able to get worked out. Remember that the goal here is not to solve every problem the student's going to have for them. And I get that a lot from folks who I'm talking to retention about in this tone, this idea of, hey, Brenda, it's not my job to find them backup daycare. No, you're right. It's probably not your job. But if you can put together a short list of services, a short list of daycares that allow drop-in, YMCAs are common to have drop-in hours, a daycare that's close to the school that might be willing to work with them. If you could just put that together in a short list, it's just being a resource. It's kind of like telling people, here's 5 banks in town who do student loans. It's really just trying to provide that option of being a resource. So a couple of samples there. Let's take a look on 4 weeks out, so roughly a month before. I am a big believer at this point. It's important to have that verbal communication, even if it's one way, even if it's just leaving a message. Let them hear your voice again. Remember, whoever is making this phone call, you are the critical relationship with the institution at this point. They haven't started classes yet. You are it. When they think Brenda Harms University, they only think of their recruiter. That person's name is the whole school for them. So some sort of a phone message. And again, just a sample. I was looking through the list of students who will be starting classes next month and saw your name. I really am pleased you've decided to take this step. I know finishing your master's degree is a significant goal for you, and my advice to you, let nothing stand in your way. Just a supportive, just a cheerleader, just an encouraging moment. Again, you have no way of anticipating if your timing, this message might be waiting at home for this prospective student on the day that he or she came home from work, was completely exhausted and started thinking on the drive, there is no way I could go to night class tonight. I'm way too beat. This might just be that little extra nudge that they need, or it might be that connection that makes them pick up the phone and call you and say, hey, I'm having second thoughts. You want that phone call. You far and away want that phone call to just seeing their name drop off the list of students who are starting. So these little reach outs, these little encouraging moments are really that opportunity for a reconnection. Okay, 3 weeks to start. And here I really do feel like, again, we're closing in on that time frame. Just a couple of weeks out, I think an electronic communication is fine. As students at XYZ University, as you prepare to start class in a few weeks, we wanted to share with you an interesting chart that really reinforces your decision to earn your degree, whether that's a master's or a bachelor's. While your financial future might not be the only thing you had in mind when you made the decision to start school with us, it is certainly a piece of the decision for many of our students. And then I just included this chart as something you could easily slip into an email. Yes, you are right. I know what you're thinking right now. Well, Brenda, not every one of our students is motivated by professional growth or by money. And that is true, but I will tell you the vast majority are. And I think that little out that you would give yourself within the context of a written email saying, these might not be your reasons, but it's the reasons for a lot of our students, really allows you to reinforce that idea and that message of come on back to school. There's some nice benefits to it. It can also really help you if you're having a conversation with a student about the financial piece. And is this investment in myself right now really smart? And helping them to see what their earning potential might become as they complete their degree. So that's one option right there. Another option, I know a lot of schools still utilize some sort of new student orientation. I know not every school does, but a lot of schools still do. And this too can become a really nice place for you to affirm for them their decision. I am stunned. I've had the pleasure of sitting in on a number of schools' new student orientations, and whether they're for adult programs, graduate programs, or even traditional undergraduate students, I am stunned at how we immediately move past saying to them, hey, you've made a really good choice. I think we have to be cognizant and careful of the fact that that student is still sitting there thinking, at that moment, I can hit the eject button and I'm out no money in no time, right? This is kind of my last chance. This is when you're sitting at house closing and you think to yourself, do I really want to put my name on that paper? This is that moment for students. And so I think when we do have, whether it's a new student orientation, whether you do that online, whether you do it in a face-to-face format, or it's simply a final communication that you send out, we have to lead with reinforcing that they've made a great choice. Obviously, you need to review next steps. Obviously, you want them to be familiar with what they need to do and the responsibilities they have. But please, please, please don't have it only be about that. I will also say that at early on orientation, discussion of support services is also really critical, regardless of the market you serve, whether it's traditional undergrad, an adult returning to school, or a grad student. We know that as students get closer to starting school, the rapid heart rate around, oh my gosh, can I really do this, increases. And so discussing right here and now, lots of support services. A lot of you are very confident getting into your college experience, but please know if you get there and you discover that it's a little, you've got some challenges or you need some brush up that you weren't anticipating needing, we have lots of support services in place. This should not be the only place where you discuss your support services, but this could certainly be a nice place to make sure to infuse that. Because again, that idea of building multiple relationships around a student towards retention is a really crucial one, and that support services element can be a key piece of that. Okay, so then somewhere 1 to 2 weeks before they officially start school, I think it's really important to do some sort of a phone call. Personally, I like to see this as an appointment, that there really is the human interaction on the phone with a student before they start school. And I'm a little bit of this is probably just me being a little old school, but candidly, you can hear it in a voice of a student pretty easily if they are waffling on the idea of coming back. You can hear it in their hesitation, in their, I'm not really sure, or that sort of thing, that you can begin to pick up on it. So I like this to be a phone call where you actually communicate with them, whether it's a formal appointment that you set, or you simply do some phone calls in the evening to make sure you can track these students down. I think it's important. I think, yes, but do you have any final questions? But I will tell you the answer to that's almost always no, I'm good. And they're, that urge to just wrap the call up in 30 seconds was right there. I would absolutely start with the conversation around, wow, it's go time. We're here. And, how excited you must be, that sort of communication. I think it's important to review classrooms, where are students going for sign of class, that sort of thing. If it's that experience, if it's an online experience, kind of reviewing that idea of how early can they get into the course room, what head start can they give themselves in an online environment. Many online environments actually open up the course room 2 or 3 days before the official start of class, just so a student can kind of begin the process of fumbling around. If you have students who are in their first online class, really, really helpful. And then I think within this messaging, you have to say to them, I really want to know how this goes for you. Again, it reinforces that idea of I'm not just interested in getting you started, I'm interested in you getting through successfully. So ask them to stay in touch with you. Okay, here's where I'm occasionally accused of being a little over the top, but I will tell you it is perhaps one of the most dynamite things that you can do, and it takes about an hour of your time at the most. When students are starting class, and I know not everyone has this benefit, but for example, if you have a We probably see this a bit more in adult programs and in graduate programs, but there is a clear first night of the term, and literally the majority of your students will come to class, whether that's virtually or in the classroom, on that first night of class. If you have that standard first night of class, and if it's in person, I cannot tell you the wow factor of having the people who recruited them show up. And it doesn't mean take time from class. Literally, it can be walking through the halls of where your classes are offered. It can be just being outside the building to say, so glad to see you here tonight, just wanted to wish you good luck. That seems like a really small thing, unless you're the recruiter, in which case maybe it seems like kind of a giant pain because you're usually not on campus at those hours or whatever. It's really impactful. I have had the great pleasure of doing some student focus groups at schools where recruiters have taken the time to do this, or academic deans of programs, or a program lead. I mean, fill in the blank here. Somebody that they know, who they have some, even if it's a loose connection to, who took the time. The thing that wows here is that somebody took the time to come and wish them well in person. I will also tell you, if you are in a virtual situation, students are going to be starting class online or those sorts of things, even if you only have the opportunity to pop in virtually and send a message out to the whole class. For those of you who this is your first night of class with us at XYZ University, I just wanted to personally welcome you and tell you I can't wait to hear how this goes for you. Huge impact. And again, that follow-up of please tell me how it goes. I want to know. After they've started, so here's where so often students fall off, right? We can get the majority of students to actually get to class the first night, virtually or otherwise. And then the terror sets in, right? They get the syllabus, they see all that's required, they sit in the classroom and realize maybe they're older or younger than other peers. They start to get really nervous. The first night of class, little Johnny was sick and they weren't anticipating that. And so now all the doubt starts creeping in. Because you know that's a critical moment when students are going to jump out and bail out on you, I think a reinforcement right here, right now is really critical. I put down 2 days after class starts. If you know, for example, your classes are all starting on a Thursday night, boy, I'd get this message in front of folks on Friday before they have the whole weekend to stew and think about dropping. Get in front of them with an electronic communication. Let them know that it is totally normal that they are feeling completely overwhelmed and that you want to talk to them about that if it's causing them a lot of anxiety. Stick with them here. 2 things. Number 1, how important is retention to you at your campus? And I can't answer that for you. Every school tells me, retention is really important. But then it comes to, so what are you willing to do? An email is far less inconvenient, but I will tell you, if you're really serious about retention, have this be a phone call. Send the electronic communication and do a follow-up phone call. And yes, I mean that with every one of your students. And for some of you, that could mean hundreds of phone calls. I know what I am asking of you. But again, this is your chance to catch the person who's about to walk out your door. And many of you have heard me say, and I hope no one will I'm just going to be direct about this. I don't like to think about our students as money. But if you think about the fact that one student is, and let's just for simplicity's sake call it $20,000 to your institution. I know for some of you it's much more, for some of you it's much less. Personally, it is worth it to me to pick up the phone to try to save $20,000. If I told you right now all you had to do is pick up the phone and call me and reach me for me to give you a check for $20,000, I can guarantee you the 100 people on this webinar would pick up the phone and call me right now. Guarantee you they would. This is your opportunity to get in front of those students who are wavering, and this is a critical retention time. I would do the phone call as well. If nothing else, the piece that the phone call lets you know is who is locked down and you feel really good about and who you know is wavering. And if every recruiter, and I'm just going to use some arbitrary numbers here, if every recruiter has brought in, let's just say, 75 new students for that start or 50 new students for that start, and they know that they now have a short list of 5 that they need to keep a close eye on, they can put a mini retention plan in place for that 5 students far easier than they can for the 50. So again, it really lets you to know who you need to be most concerned about. Okay, after class. Now, I will tell you this. There are many schools who between that roughly right after the start of class and 2 weeks out, go ahead and plug in maybe 1 or 2 additional communications. I am a big believer in we're not trying to get 100 things in place right out of the gate. Let's get 10 things in place that we can go on tomorrow. That's my goal for you here. So I did not put in, the phone call follow-up at day 5, the additional electronic communication at day 7, the additional electronic communication at day 10, reminding them of support services and those sorts of things. You can certainly do all that. But again, get something in place initially, and you can build this thing out forever. So 2 weeks after classes have started is where I jumped in next. With that idea of hope things are going well. Now, this is, to me, a really logical time if you have a different academic advising staff from recruitment staff. This is a real clear place for me where it will make perfect sense both to the student as well as to both the advisor and recruiter, the professionals involved, to say, okay, here's the handoff. If this is done earlier, this might be the place where your recruiter sends this final message saying, looks like you're underway, looks like things are going really well. I'm going to hand you off to your academic advisor now, but please know you can reach back out to me anytime. I know some schools who are a little hesitant to offer that because they're terrified that 300 students are going to be busy reaching back out to their recruitment staff, and their recruitment staff actually need to be focusing on bringing in the next class. I get that. You can make the offer to 300 people. 10 or 15 might actually connect with you again. So I think it's a nice thing to offer to people. Okay, now we're going to fast forward a bit. Again, not because it's not smart to have additional communication throughout the term or the semester. It absolutely is. But like I admitted already, get some sort of a plan in place. This, to me, is a piece of that initial plan. 1 week prior to the end of the term. So as you're coming up on that final week or two, it's surprising to me, but it happens. I still teach, as many of you know, and I'm stunned at the students who 1 or 2 weeks before class suddenly realize they're not doing very well. And if you've ever taught, you are smiling right now. You have had this experience, I'm sure, as well. Prior to the end of the term, send them out a note. Congrats on your great success this term. I can tell you if they read that note and they're not having great success, you will more than likely hear back from them at that point. I also think it's important to reinforce that, hey, look, you have just moved a step towards completing your goal, and that's really an important step. Other additional communications that you might want to have go out, 4 months into the program. Again, this is your foundation, 4 months into your program. So whenever you started, count out 4 months, some sort of a reminder. This can be an electronic communication about why they made the decision to go to school here in the first place. For some of our students, we know that the newness has worn off, the exciting part has worn off, the, oh my gosh, look at me, I just bought a textbook and I can't wait to sit down and read it element has worn off, and now it's the drudgery of just doing classwork, right? So reinforcing to them why they made the decision, bettering their lives, increasing their professional marketability, positioning themselves for more additional opportunities longer term, whatever it is. I will also tell you this is a place where if you are utilizing a CRM and your recruitment staff has put good notes in the front end of the CRM, and yep, recruitment staff, I'm looking at all of you right now. If you've done a good job on the front end, this is a place where your academic advisor can go back and take a peek at that and really customize some messaging here to stick with students. Another place where I think there's just a foundational critical need, 25% into the program. So again, if you have a 2-year program, this is at the end of first semester probably. If it's a 4-year program, it's the end of the first year. Wherever it is, if you have an 18-month program, yes, it's just a couple months in. Like I said, you're going to have to customize this to you. You have to acknowledge what they've accomplished. One of the reasons that I like accelerated programs is because a student feels like they're constantly walking towards their goal. There's not this enroll in class, wait for 4 months, and then start getting credits. For a student who's in an 18-month program, 3 or 4 months in, boom, they've already taken huge steps. So acknowledge the credits that they've earned. If there has been again, this is where academic advisors, I think, are well positioned to do this at this point. If there's been a class that was going to be particularly hard for them that they've now successfully completed, whatever it is, celebrate at this point. This can be electronic. Again, you guys all know I'm a big phone person. If you can make these phone calls and even just leave messages, I think that's exciting. But yes, you really will have to customize a little bit student by student. I know academic advising standards in the United States, 200 to 300 students is your caseload, and I get that. It's a big number of students to try to manage. But realistically, you're going to have maybe 50 to 75 students who hit that point of completion 25% of the way through all at the same time. Take the time. It's well worth it. The other thing I love to see, and again, if you really want to impress somebody as an academic advisor, know what class they are most terrified of taking. For those of us who have done advising, you could probably name it in every program you've ever advised for. For me, in the psychology program that I used to advise in, and in the human services program, it was the stats class. And I can tell you the minute students cleared stats, I personally let out a huge sigh of relief, as did they, I'm sure. If you can flag in your own internal system some sort of particular reminder to send a note to a student once they've gotten through that difficult class, again, it says, I know you, I remember you, I know your hopes, I know your dreams, I also know your fears, and you just overcame a big one. Hugely impactful. Half finished, the halfway mark, the 50% done mark, is also a great thing to celebrate. I will also tell you that by this point, most of your students who are in, and one of the things that they're going to say is, wow, time is flying by. This is moving so quickly for me. And that's terrific. You hope that it actually does. Okay, 75% of the way finished. So again, to your program, we're a year and a half into it. You would be completely stunned at the number of students who leave their academic programs with just a few courses to go. 1 and 2 classes, I've seen it that narrow. 5 classes is actually surprisingly routine of students who get to the halfway mark but then stop out after that. Cheering that the end is in sight, cheering the fact that they have done so much, that they've gotten so far, and all they have to do is the big push to the end. This is a time when it's critical to have some extra support, because trust me, if they've gotten worn down by the schedule and the routine of making time for school, it's at this point. If the financial piece is really starting to pinch them in a bad way, it's at this point. Celebrate with them all that they have gotten done. And again, these communications, a piece of what they're designed to do is simply to open the door for them to call you or email you back and say, boy, I'm really struggling. I don't know if I'm going to get to the end. You want to know that, because then you have the opportunity to retain that student. Celebrating GPA also seems to be a thing that is a nice little item, if you will, to get excited about how well they've been doing in their program. Last term, or last section of classes, last semester they're registered for, last term they're registered for. At this point, retention, again, you will still have students who, oddly enough, drop out at this late point in the game, but typically they're going to finish. Right now, what you're doing, though, is you are setting the stage to make them a student for life. Whether you have master's programs you want them to come back into, or you want them to be an alumni who speaks positively about you on the backside, or you want to ask them for a prospective student referral, you are setting the stage with your communication at this point. Help them to stop. Remember how I said sometimes we have to stop ourselves at the front end as we're recruiting students to actually acknowledge, wow, you just made the big step. You just said you were going to do this. Same thing at the end here. You have to stop them sometimes and say, wow, look at what you've gotten done. Look at what you've accomplished in the last year and a half or 2 years, whatever it is. So help them to stop and hit the pause button for a minute and really celebrate what they've done. Again, if you have a good recruiter on the front end who has recorded information well in your CRM, I would go back to that CRM and pull out why they wanted to come to school. If my motivation was to return to school, was that next time there's this job open, I want to be qualified to do it, I would remind them of that. Also, too, one of the things I hear over and over from alum when I ask them about what their academic experience gave to them, besides the academic knowledge and the credential and all those sorts of things, they talk often about the confidence that they've gained, both personally and professionally. I think it's entirely acceptable to comment on that and to how they have grown as individuals, and that's a nice place to do it. In those last couple of weeks of class, and we're just coming into our last couple slides here, as we come into those last weeks of class, I think it's really important that you thank them. And not thanks for spending your money with us, but thanks for giving me the honor and the privilege of watching you go through this process, of watching you complete this goal professionally in your life or personally in your life. Share with them that you're going to be at graduation, if you do indeed attend graduation, that you're anxious to watch them walk across stage and all those things. And like I said, be appreciative of the honor and the privilege of being able to be part of that journey. I think it's really critical. When I think about retaining students, I think retention is often, not always, but often, built on or built around someone on campus having a relationship with a student that lasts through the student life cycle. Having that person be willing to find reasons and create reasons to celebrate with that student as many steps along the way as possible. And all of those opportunities for celebration need to be separate from it's time to register for class. That is not an encouraging message. In the event I even needed to say that, right? We send out the blast of, hey guys, time to register for next semester, and we somehow think that's a retention tool. It's absolutely not. They have to be separate reasons. So whatever they are for you, whatever they are for your retention person, whatever they are for your advising staff or whoever takes care of students throughout their life cycle. I've seen birthday notes, I've seen holiday cards. I love, and many of you have heard me tell the story of the note that I got during my PhD program, that it was just a situation of perfect timing. The card that I got at my house that was literally signed by my mentor, it just arrived on the perfect day. You never know when timing will be perfect. I think it's really important that we take advantage of as many opportunities as we can. Okay, I have literally done it. I have actually left time for questions at the end. I'm so proud of myself. So as you are typing in questions or wanting to have some follow-up dialogue around any of these topics, go ahead and do that right now. And while you're doing that, I want to remind you of two things coming up here, and then Megan's going to read. If there are any questions, Megan's going to share those with me. We have two future webinars coming up with Converge, one in May and one in June that I just wanted to mention to you. The May webinar is on digital storytelling and how that can give you a competitive advantage. The June webinar is on authentic versus automated communications and taking a look at how you can do both. So that May webinar and June webinar, please register for those. Both going to be really interesting, and I think begin to build on this topic that we've discussed for this last month. The other thing I want to remind you of is that Converge Consulting is doing their yearly conference again. This year will be in New Orleans, October 21st and 22nd. Converge 2015, we have a great lineup of speakers. You can see that on our website. Please feel free to go check that out. We're still filling out some of our speaking list, but it'll at least begin to give you a sense of some of the folks that we're going to have at that conference, and we would love for you to join us in New Orleans. In our last remaining minutes, Megan, did we have any questions that came in regarding this particular topic, or are there any things that I can speak to a little bit further?
Yeah, Brenda, actually, we just got a question. For online students who live abroad in different time zones, do you have any advice on connecting easily? This person says they, Zoom or Skype with them, but it's pretty hard to connect any way other than email. Any ideas on that?
Sure, and that will be challenging. I mean, my guess is you're probably doing everything that I'm going to recommend. Number one, if you have someone who's recruiting in a program, so some things you might do to make that a little bit easier. You might group those students so that all internationally based students are being academically advised by the same person. That's one way that you might do this. And speak to that advisor about the fact that you recognize fully that they might have to work some fairly unusual hours to actually connect with students. Yes, absolutely Skype. Yes, absolutely do phone calls. You are unfortunately probably going to be more reliant due to need on electronic communication than anything. But I also think with international, you have a real opportunity to occasionally send some mail. And I know that, again, like I said, I know that seems so old school, but quite frankly, I believe mail almost has more impact today because people so rarely get it. I mean, think about your own mailbox and all the stuff that you've gotten over the course of the last month. Probably one or two things was actually something other than a bill. And think about how much those items mean to you. I think that, too, that mail is a real opportunity. But international is hard, and I would commit to, if you can, asking some of your recruitment staff to be willing to work some of the crazy hours that it does require. And, yes, I know I'm asking people to be up at 2 in the morning. Again, how far will you go for that enrollment? So that would be my suggestion. And again, I'm guessing you're probably doing those things right now, but I think you're down the right path with that.
That's great, Brenda. We have 2 more questions. Actually, one more just came in. We have a couple more minutes here. So this person would like to know, how do you recommend getting other departments beyond admissions on board to participate in these important relationships?
Oh, I don't know. Cookies? No. That's the hard part, right? I mean, that is the $1 million question, because really, The front-end admission staff or front-end recruitment staff are the masters of this. Nobody else on your campus has probably been engaged in this sort of a conversation before or felt it was even part of their job. So first off, I think it's really helpful when there's a top-down initiative that retention is critical and we are all going to take steps. I will also tell you schools that really share the retention responsibility, have one person driving it, but really share it across multiple professionals on campus, really do have an opportunity to have a really impactful retention effort without it all falling on one person's shoulders. So I think sitting down and discussing the importance of it, I think if you are engaging, for example, faculty in your retention efforts, minimizing what you're asking them to do and helping them to do it. So, for example, I've seen a retention strategy from a place where students say yes. So let's call it May 1 when a traditional undergrad student says yes. Let's pretend for a moment I have a 36 on my ACT. I'm top of my class. You really want me at your school. I have seen institutions who have created short lists of students that they want faculty to make a phone call to. And literally by short, I mean short. 5 from each academic department, maybe 10, and literally have a recruiter go over, set the piece of paper in front of them and visit with them and say, okay, Dr. Brown, this is Brenda Harms. Here's her background. Here's her story. She's really excited about coming to school here. Make the phone call. I know a college president who 1 year over the summer made a phone call to every incoming freshman, welcoming them to the school. You want to talk about impact. That's huge. So sometimes it's about finding the little pieces. I would not try to tackle it all at once. Identify 3 areas you want to tackle this year and then be purposeful with them. And remember, if you can minimize what you ask them to do, the odds of them doing it are great. If you're willing to sit down right along with them, that can sometimes be helpful too.
Great. Brenda, do you think it's okay to use pre-printed postcards instead of the handwritten note? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Everyone knows I'm a big fan of the handwritten because no one does it anymore. I do think it has impact. I think if you're in a pinch, sending out a pre-printed card is certainly more than fine. The holiday card that comes out maybe December, January, the Happy New Year card, those sorts of things. I get it that some of those can be awfully difficult. But I'm also going to say this. Most of us, not all of us, I know, but many of us have access to work study students and those sorts of things who might be able to help us with putting some of that messaging down. There's a great commercial on TV right now, and I just love it, and I won't take too much time with this silly story, but there's a great commercial on right now about a gentleman who does investments for clients. And it shows him at the end of his day, his administrative assistant is shutting off the lights and going home and says something to him about not working too late, and he literally pulls out a pen and starts writing the handwritten note. How critical is this to you, you guys? I mean, that's what it comes back to. So in the absence of anything handwritten, pre-printed, absolutely. If you can pre-print and leave a little room for on the bottom, if you have an opportunity to get a handwritten note on there, I would do that because I do think they have impact. Megan, do you want to take time for one last question? Or are we done?
I think we have just one last question here.
Okay, let's do that.
If you're coming in as a new advisor, what's a good way to get to know current students and build a relationship with students in the program that you don't already know?
Great question. Very good question. So if you're new, you automatically have the excuse to ask them to come in and see you because you want to know who they are and you want to know a little bit about their circumstances. I would not require it, let's set up an hour appointment. I want to review your academic schedule because for any student of any age, that's going to feel like, oh my gosh, really? I have to start all over with someone new. I would make it as informal as possible. Please stop by my office on Monday night at 7 o'clock before class at 7:30. Would love to chat with you for 10 minutes about your schedule and making sure you're feeling good about things. So first off, I'd narrow the time so that you actually have people show up. Committing 10 minutes is different than committing an hour. They might pick up the phone and call you instead. That would be okay as well. But doing some of that purposeful reach out. The other thing is those academic advisors, you have the great benefit of knowing their schedules. You know where they are during their class time. Go there, show up, be outside of class, meet people, introduce yourself to people, be present. And I think that can be a big help as well. So some of it is being creative, but I think that there's an appreciation when you do run into that bind of, oops, I need my academic advisor now, and I didn't bother to meet her 3 months ago. If your face is at least familiar, that can oftentimes be helpful. Pop into classes, that sort of thing. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I know we've gotten right up to the window of time here. Thank you so much for joining us. It was great to see so many people interested in this topic of retention. Please know that the recording as well as the slides are going to be sent out tomorrow. And so look forward to getting those, and please feel free to share freely and share often with work colleagues. Retention is obviously a critical element right now at all schools, and I know I personally am looking forward to hearing your success stories of moving your numbers in a good direction. Thank you for taking the time with us. Hope we'll get to see you at Converge 2015 in New Orleans in October. Have a great day, everyone.